A 63-year-old man comes home late at night, exhausted, having nearly crashed his car more than once on the drive back. He's a salesman. He's been a salesman for 34 years for the same company. And after all that time, he can't get a job in the city he's worked his whole territory around. He's on straight commission now, which means on a trip like the one he just returned from. He made nothing at all. His wife greets him gently. His 2 grown sons are asleep upstairs, home for reasons nobody's quite said out loud yet. And somewhere inside his own head, past and present have started to blur together so completely that he'll spend the rest of this story talking, sometimes out loud, to people who aren't in the room anymore. This is Willy Loman. Arthur Miller published Death of a Salesman in 1949, and it won the Pulitzer Prize that same year. Miller himself described it as the story of a man who gave his life, or sold it, chasing a version of success that was never actually going to save him. Miller won a Pulitzer Prize that same year for this work. Let's go inside it. Miller sets his play in the late 1940s, mostly inside the Loman family's small house in Brooklyn, hemmed in on all sides now by apartment buildings that have grown up around it over the years. Tall enough now to block out most of the daylight the yard once had. That detail matters more than it looks like it should. The house used to sit on open land, with room to breathe and grow a garden. Now, sunlight barely reaches the yard. The city has closed in around Willy the same way his own life has. Structurally, the play is unusual, and Miller built it that way on purpose. He originally wanted to call it The Inside of His Head. Rather than telling this story through clean flashbacks, Miller lets the past physically bleed into the present on stage. Willy doesn't remember his younger, more hopeful years, so much as he starts living inside them again, mid-conversation, while the people around him in the present look on, unsure whether to interrupt. It's a portrait of a mind that has stopped being able to hold reality and memory apart. Willy has 2 grown sons. Biff, 34, was a golden boy in high school, a football star recruited by 3 different colleges, adored by everyone, including his father, who genuinely believed Biff was destined for greatness far beyond anything ordinary. Now Biff has spent more than a decade drifting through ranch work and farm labor out west, unable to settle into anything. And he's come home, uncertain and a little ashamed, trying to figure out what to do with his life. Happy, 32, works as an assistant to an assistant buyer at a department store, a title he inflates whenever he introduces himself, and has built his entire adult identity around imitating his father's belief that charm and being well-liked will eventually add up to something big. And then there's Linda, Willy's wife, who sees exactly how fragile her husband has become. She's already found signs that he's tried to take his own life more than once, and who chooses, again and again, to protect his illusions rather than confront him with the truth. Her loyalty isn't naive. It's a deliberate, painful choice made by someone who understands precisely what she's protecting him from and decides love means shielding him from it anyway. To understand what actually destroys Willy Loman, you have to understand the specific version of the American dream he's spent his whole life selling, to his sons, and mostly to himself. Willy doesn't believe that hard work, skill, or competence are what make a man successful. He believes personality is what matters. Charm, being well-liked. He tells his sons, over and over throughout the play, that the man who's well-liked will always come out ahead of the man who merely works hard and knows what he's doing. It's why he dismisses Bernard, Charlie's studious, unglamorous son next door, as someone who will never really succeed, despite being obviously brilliant, simply because Bernard isn't charismatic in the way Willy prizes above almost everything else. This belief isn't random. It's connected to Willy's own life story, and specifically to his older brother Ben, who appears throughout the play only in Willy's memories and hallucinations, since Ben has been dead for years by the time the story takes place. Ben, in Willy's retelling, walked into the African jungle at 17 looking for their father, and walked out 4 years later, unbelievably, fabulously rich from diamonds. Ben represents the version of success Willy has spent his life measuring himself against, sudden, mythic, achieved through boldness and luck rather than patient work. Willy once had the chance to go with Ben to Alaska, chasing that same kind of fortune, and turned it down to stay in sales instead. He's never stopped wondering, out loud in front of his family, whether that was the single decision that doomed him to an ordinary, unglamorous life. It's worth noticing how often Ben appears at exactly the moments Willy feels most cornered by reality. Every time Willy's present-day life closes in on him, a bill he can't pay, a son who won't listen, a boss who won't promote him, Ben materializes in his mind, offering the same seductive alternative: skip the slow, uncertain grind and take the one bold leap that guarantees fortune. Ben isn't really a memory at that point. He's the fantasy Willy reaches for whenever the real world becomes unbearable, and Miller uses his recurring ghostly appearances to chart exactly how far Willy has drifted from anything solid. Contrast that with Charlie, Willy's neighbor, and Charlie's son Bernard. Charlie is everything Willy refuses to respect: quiet, unflashy, methodical, and, as it turns out, genuinely successful, comfortable enough that he can casually offer Willy a job late in the play, an offer Willy is too proud and too humiliated to accept. Bernard, the boy Willy always dismissed as merely smart rather than well-liked, grows up to become a successful lawyer, happily married, about to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. Miller places Charlie and Bernard directly beside Willy and Biff, specifically so the audience can't avoid the comparison. The version of success Willy scorned, quiet competence, patient effort, honesty, is the version that actually worked. Biff's arc in this play is the emotional center of the whole tragedy, and Miller reveals the real cause of his drifting, purposeless adult life gradually through memory scenes that intrude on the present with increasing urgency. As a teenager, Biff worshipped his father completely. He believed every story Willy told about his own success and popularity, and he built his own sense of self entirely around living up to Willy's version of what a great man looks like. Then, at 17, on the verge of failing a math class that would have kept him out of college, Biff traveled to Boston to find Willy on a business trip, hoping his father could somehow fix the situation the way Willy always seemed to fix everything. Instead, Biff walked in on his father in a hotel room with another woman, an affair Willy had been having during his long stretches on the road. Biff's entire understanding of who his father is collapses in that single moment. Willy isn't the tireless, honest hero he'd built himself up to be in his son's eyes. He's just a man, flawed and unfaithful, telling a version of his own story that was never entirely true. Devastated, Biff refused to make up the failed class, abandoned any real interest in college, and effectively let his entire planned future quietly die, right there in that hotel room. He spent the years since drifting from job to job out west, never quite able to explain to himself, let alone to his father, why he never became anything. The tragedy here works on two levels at once. Biff loses faith not just in his father, but in the entire philosophy Willy raised him on. The idea that charm and confidence are enough, that hard truths can be smoothed over with a smile. And Willy, for his part, has spent the 15 years since that day in Boston never fully admitting to himself what happened or why his relationship with his favorite son quietly, permanently changed. He keeps swinging between blaming Biff for wasting his potential and desperately trying to revive the old adoration, without ever confronting the actual wounds sitting underneath all of it. Miller lets the audience see the Boston hotel room in fragments throughout the play, returning to it again and again in Willy's mind, each time a little more complete, as though Willy himself can only bear to look at the memory in small, manageable pieces. The play's present-day action covers roughly 24 hours, and Miller structures it around two parallel attempts at redemption that both collapse on the same terrible day. Biff, trying to give his father one more reason for pride, agrees to visit a former employer named Bill Oliver to ask for a loan to start a sporting goods business with Happy, something Willy becomes instantly, almost desperately excited about, treating it as proof that Biff is finally about to become the great man he was always destined to be. Willy gives Biff a flood of contradictory, half-coherent advice about how to make the pitch, revealing just how disconnected from practical reality his own thinking has become. The next morning, at Linda's urging, Willy goes to see his young boss, Howard Wagner, to ask for a stable position in the New York office, instead of the exhausting travel that's been wearing him down for years. It's one of the most devastating scenes in American theater, precisely because of how ordinary the cruelty is. Howard, distracted by a new recording device he's excited to show off, barely listens to Willy. Willy reminds him, with mounting desperation, that he's been with the company for 34 years, that he named Howard himself as a baby at his father's request. None of it matters. Howard, calmly and almost apologetically, fires him. Willy, a man who built his entire identity around being indispensable through sheer personality, is let go by a boss who barely knows who he is. Meanwhile, Biff's meeting with Oliver goes even worse than he feared. Oliver doesn't remember him at all, a detail that quietly reveals Biff was never actually the valued former employee Willy always claimed he was. Humiliated and in a strange, self-destructive moment of spite, Biff steals Oliver's expensive fountain pen from his office before leaving, then immediately regrets it, holding the pen almost in disbelief at his own action. It's a small, sharp image of a man still, at 34, unable to figure out who he actually is. That evening, Willy, Biff, and Happy meet for dinner at a restaurant meant to celebrate what everyone assumed would be Biff's triumphant news. Instead, it becomes the play's emotional breaking point. Biff genuinely tries, to tell his father the truth, that Oliver didn't remember him, that there's no loan, that the sporting goods business isn't happening. Willy, unable to absorb the disappointment, starts slipping into memory even as he sits at the table, drifting back toward that hotel room in Boston without fully leaving the present moment, so that past and present overlap on stage at the same time. Happy, true to the pattern he's spent his whole life learning from his father, starts inventing a more flattering version of events to smooth things over, rather than deal with what actually happened. When two women arrive at the restaurant, Happy and Biff, ashamed, embarrassed, unable to sit with their father's unraveling any longer, simply leave with them, abandoning Willy alone at the table in the middle of a full-blown breakdown. Willy makes his way home that night in pieces, and Miller shows us, for the first time explicitly, just how far his mental state has deteriorated. He's found alone in the backyard in the dark, trying to plant vegetable seeds by flashlight, as though he can still salvage something real and lasting from a life that's slipping away from him. While he plants, he holds an entire hallucinated conversation with his dead brother Ben, working through a plan built around the fact that Willy is worth considerably more to his family dead than alive, thanks to his life insurance policy. When Biff finally finds him outside, ashamed of abandoning his father at the restaurant, the two of them have the play's final, most naked confrontation. Biff, finally done pretending, tells Willy directly, neither of them is ever going to be a great man. That was never realistic, and clinging to the fantasy has only ever hurt them both. He shows Willy the rubber tubing Linda found earlier, evidence of a prior suicide attempt Willy has denied, and begs his father to simply let go of the lie they've all been living inside for so long. Overwhelmed, Biff breaks down crying in his father's arms. Here is the moment the entire play has been building toward, and Miller renders it with devastating restraint rather than melodrama. Willy, watching his son cry, doesn't hear failure or rejection in that breakdown. He hears, for the first time in 15 years, unmistakable proof that Biff still loves him, genuinely, without needing him to be a great man first. It's the exact reassurance Willy has been chasing since that hotel room in Boston. And instead of that love pulling him back towards staying alive for his family, it does something far more tragic. It convinces Willy, in his confused, desperate logic, that he finally has the one thing worth leaving behind, proof of Biff's love, and that his death, and the insurance money it would bring, could set his son free to finally become the success Willy always believed he could be. Linda, worried, wants to stay near him. Willy insists he simply needs a few quiet minutes alone before bed. Once everyone has gone upstairs, he leaves the house and gets into his car. Miller doesn't show the moment of impact. He doesn't need to. The sound of the car speeding away, followed by the family's desperate rush outside, tells the audience everything, and the scene dissolves directly into Willy's funeral. The requiem that closes the play is brief, quiet, and almost unbearably sparse. Only Linda, Biff, Happy, Charlie, and Bernard stand at the grave. Nobody else comes. Not a single one of the countless people Willy always insisted were his friends across every territory he ever worked. The entire foundation of his belief that being well-liked was the thing that mattered most in life. Linda, standing at the grave, cannot understand why no one showed up, and delivers the words that have become one of the most quoted passages in American drama, that attention must finally be paid to a man like this, that he is a human being, and a terrible thing is happening to him, even if the world never noticed while it was happening. She also says, almost in disbelief, that they are finally free of debt, on the very day Willy is no longer alive to enjoy that freedom. The last, cruelest irony of a life spent chasing security that only arrives once it's too late to matter. Death of a Salesman is often summarized as a critique of the American dream. And that's true, but it's worth being precise about which version of the dream Miller is actually dismantling. He isn't arguing that hard work and ambition are worthless. Charlie and Bernard, standing right beside the Lomans in nearly every scene, prove the opposite. Quiet competence and honest effort really do lead somewhere solid. What Miller is attacking is a specific, hollow substitute for that dream. The belief that charisma and being well-liked can replace substance entirely, that a smile and a shoeshine are a business plan, that reality can be indefinitely postponed, as long as you keep telling a more flattering story instead. Willy Loman isn't a fool, exactly, and he isn't simply lazy. Miller is careful never to let the audience dismiss him that easily. He's a man who bought completely into a cultural myth that was sold to him just as hard as he ever sold anything himself, and who spent 34 years working brutally hard inside a system that discarded him the moment he stopped being profitable, regardless of loyalty or effort. Howard firing him isn't personal cruelty exactly. It's something colder and more damning. Capitalism's basic indifference to a man's decades of service once he's no longer useful. Willy's tragedy is that he never had the tools or the honesty to separate the real dignity of hard work from the false promise of easy charm. And by the time reality finally catches up to him, he has nothing solid left to stand on. Even the objects he's spent his life paying off, the refrigerator, the car, the house itself, outlive him, or nearly do, coming due right around the time his own usefulness runs out. A bitter irony Miller lets the audience notice without ever spelling it out directly. Biff is the character who survives this collapse with something like clarity. His final confrontation with Willy isn't an act of cruelty. It's the only real act of love left available to him, the refusal to keep lying to a dying man just to make things easier, where Happy chooses, even at his father's grave, to keep believing the fantasy, insisting Willy's dream was right and that he'll prove it by succeeding where his father failed. Biff walks away from the funeral with something far more valuable and far more painful: the willingness to actually see his own life clearly, without the inherited lie distorting the picture. It's also worth sitting with Linda's role in all of this, because her loyalty is easy to misread as simple passivity. She isn't blind to Willy's failures or his affair. The play makes clear she understands far more than she ever says aloud. Her choice to protect his illusions, rather than shatter them, isn't naivety. It's a considered, painful bet that love sometimes means shielding someone from a truth they may not survive hearing. Miller doesn't resolve whether that choice was right. He simply lets Linda stand at the grave afterward, still defending a man the world walked past, insisting that his life deserved to be noticed, even if it never was. Arthur Miller called Death of a Salesman a tragedy, but he insisted, against the traditions of classical theater, that an ordinary traveling salesman deserved the same tragic weight usually reserved for kings and generals. Willy Loman's fall isn't from some great height of political power. It's from the much smaller, much more universal height of believing your life has mattered, that you've been seen and valued by the people and the world around you. Miller argued, in essays written around the same time as the play, that the common man is as apt a subject for tragedy as any prince, because the terror of losing one's identity and place in the world belongs to everyone, not just the powerful. That's why the play still lands, decades later. in any economy that quietly discards workers the moment they stop being profitable, and in any family still passing down the same fragile, inherited belief that being liked is the same thing as being worthy. Willy Loman spent his whole life selling a version of himself he never fully believed in. The tragedy isn't that he failed, it's that almost nobody, including himself, ever really saw who he actually was. A man capable of real tenderness, real effort, and real love, buried underneath decades of a story he felt he had to keep telling in order to be worth anything at all. If this breakdown helped the story click for you, subscribe. We're going through the books your teacher assigned, but nobody actually explained. Next up, a farm, a group of animals who overthrow their masters, and the leaders who become exactly what they replaced, one broken promise at a time. See you there.